care of a newborn, she still managed all our projects and led our weekly staff meetings on Zoom. Honestly, Whitney was amazing. I didn't know how she could do it, especially because I knew her husband Paul was absolutely no help whatsoever. He was younger than her and extremely immature. I'd only met him twice at different company holiday parties, but I knew that she deserved so much better than him. She worked full-time and had to take care of the baby while he didn't have a job and did literally nothing around the house. And the crazy thing was, Whitney never complained about him. If I were her, I would have divorced the loser a long time ago. A few weeks ago, Whitney was leading our Friday Zoom meeting as usual. It was just me and her this time because our other staff member Derek was doing a safety inspection at our newest power plants. Things were fine at first, but I could hear the baby start crying in the background. She just wouldn't stop. Whitney apologized profusely and told me to take a 10-minute break. She shut off her camera and left the room to calm the baby down. What she didn't realize was that she left her microphone on. During the break, I left my computer to fix some coffee, but I ran back when I heard a voice coming from my speaker. At first, I thought that Whitney was trying to get my attention, but when I got closer to my computer, I realized that it was a man's voice. It was Paul. I figured he was talking to someone on the phone because I could only hear his side of the conversation. Obviously, he didn't realize that Whitney's microphone was still on. "She's with the baby," he said. "I have a couple of minutes before she gets back." Then he paused. "Trust me, she doesn't suspect a thing. All I need to do is find the papers." He said something else after that, but I couldn't make out what he said because he was loudly rifling through papers right next to the computer. I knew that he was searching through Whitney's desk. I couldn't believe it. What was he trying to find? I heard a desk drawer slam shut, and then Paul said, "Found it. Oh crap, she's coming back. Gotta go." I didn't hear anything else until Whitney's face popped back onto my screen and she said, "Sorry about that, I'm back now." I didn't know what to do. Her husband was up to some pretty shady business that he obviously didn't want her to know about. But I couldn't say anything in case he could hear me from the other room. So I said, "Whitney, can you open your chat? I need to send you something." I figured that didn't sound too suspicious. So I opened the chat and wrote down exactly what happened. I didn't make any assumptions about what Paul was trying to do. I just told her that he was talking to someone on the phone and stealing papers when she wasn't in the room. Whitney read my message and said, "I see. Thanks for bringing this to my attention." "Of course," I told her. "I'm so sorry." She said we could finish the meeting some other time. She needed to deal with this situation right away. Then she ended the meeting. I felt terrible for her. Was Paul trying to steal from her? Was he planning to do something even worse? I wouldn't put it past him. That afternoon, I got a call from our safety manager, Derek. He sounded really panicked. He asked me if anything strange had happened during my meeting with Whitney. I wasn't sure if I should tell him. I'd worked with him for 5 years, and I never had any reason to distrust the guy. But I knew that he was friends with Paul. They went to the same gym. I thought that if I told him what had happened, he'd tell Paul. So I said, "Nope, nothing strange." He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to tell Whitney." "I can't keep secrets from our boss, Derek," I told him. "Please," he said. "I think something terrible happened." "Just tell me," I said. He took a deep breath and explained that there was something wrong with the safety protocols at our newest power plant. He discovered a potentially cataclysmic defect with one of the machines, but when he went over all the tests, he saw that the results were fine. He suspected that Whitney found out about the defects and was hiding the results so that we didn't have to close down the plants. "Do you know this for sure?" I asked him. "I'm 100% sure that the results were changed," he said, "but I needed proof, so I talked with Paul. I told him to find the original test results in Whitney's desk because I knew she still had them. He was supposed to get them today and then meet with me at the power plant an hour ago. But he never showed, and I'm worried that Whitney found out. If she's capable of ignoring a problem that puts potentially thousands of people in danger, I don't know what she'd do to her husband to protect that secret." Then he started crying. I could tell that he was terrified for his friend, and probably for himself too. Whitney had always been such a good boss. She treated me with such respect. She was the businesswoman that I always wanted to be. I didn't want to believe that she'd be this ruthless, but I could tell that Derek wasn't lying. In my heart, I knew that Whitney had done something to her husband, and I had helped her. I had to make things right. I told Derek exactly what happened on that Zoom call, and he totally freaked out. I could hear him hyperventilating on the other side of the phone. "What do we do? What do we do?" he kept asking. There was only one thing we could do. We didn't have any evidence to show the police, so Derek and I had to go over to Whitney's house ourselves. I picked up Derek from the plant where he was waiting for me, and then we drove straight to Whitney's house. Once we got there, I didn't know what we would find. I told Derek to wait in the car, and I walked up to her front door. I knocked, and Whitney answered right away. She had her baby in her arms. She asked me why I came, and I told her that I was worried about her after our Zoom meeting. She did not seem happy that I was there. She tried to get me to leave, but I noticed that she kept glancing to the side in the direction of her kitchen. I told her that I'd leave, but I really needed to come in and use her bathroom. She didn't want to let me in at first, but when I begged her, she opened the door all the way for me to enter. I didn't go to the bathroom, of course. I walked straight toward the kitchen. She screamed at me that the bathroom was in the other direction, but I didn't stop. Once I entered the kitchen, I saw what she was hiding. Paul was duct taped to a chair with cuts across his arms and face. Both his eyes were swollen shut and he was barely conscious. Whitney walked up behind me, still holding her baby. "I had to do it," she said. "He wouldn't tell me who he was working with." "Is it true that the power plant has a problem?" I asked. Her face twisted with rage. "It's you!" she screamed. "You're the one Paul's working with." That didn't make any sense at all. If I was the one who told Paul to find the missing documents, why would I tell her about it? Whitney gently placed her baby on the floor and then grabbed the butcher knife from the counter. It was already red with Paul's blood. "Nothing is going to stop us from opening the plant," she screamed, and she dove at me. I dodged out of the way, but she grabbed me by the hair. She was going to kill me. I knew she was. That's when Derek ran into the house and screamed for her to stop. He said that he had already called the police. As soon as Whitney heard that, she dropped the knife. She looked completely broken, like a caged animal. After that, Whitney was arrested. The story was all over the news. The power plant shut down, and it looks like pretty soon, our company will be out of business. Paul's taking care of the baby now, and Derek and I are both trying to find new jobs. Still can't believe that my boss would do something like this.
My name is Eric. A few weekends ago, my girlfriend Nicole had to babysit her much younger half-sister Lucy. Her mom and stepdad were on some vacation, and they didn't have anyone else to watch the girl. Nicole asked me if that would be okay, and I said sure, absolutely. Nicole and I didn't have any children of our own, and I always liked Lucy. To be completely honest, I think Lucy liked me more than Nicole. Nicole was a bit too strict with her, but she saw me as some kind of a cool uncle. When Lucy arrived on Friday night, she completely ignored Nicole and ran straight to me to give me a big hug. "Uncle Eric," she screamed. "Where are you gonna take me this weekend?" Honestly, we weren't planning to take her anywhere, but for some reason I blurted out, "Chuck E. Cheese!" She absolutely freaked out. Nicole did too, but for different reasons. So even though Nicole and I would both prefer to stay inside, we took Lucy to Chuck E. Cheese. I don't think I'd ever been inside one before, not even as a kid. It was pretty much what I expected though. There were loud flashing arcade games everywhere, and a bunch of very run-down looking parents watching their overactive children race around. "Shoot me now," Nicole whispered to me when we entered. I laughed, but I guess Lucy heard her too because she turned around and glared at Nicole. "Just joking," Nicole told her sister. "I love this place." Without saying anything, Lucy ran off to the arcade. Nicole and I found a table that wasn't too sticky, and we ordered our pizza. The two of us sat at the table for a long time. I tried to suggest other fun things we could do with Lucy while she was here, but Nicole wouldn't listen. She kept complaining about how I forced her to come to Chuck E. Cheese. She was pretty mad at me. While we talked, I tried to keep an eye on Lucy. I saw her playing some of the arcade games. Then I lost her for a bit when she ran off to the bathroom. When she came back, I saw her try one of those racing games where the players sit on a big plastic motorcycle in front of a giant screen. If I were her age, that would have been something I like. While Nicole kept nagging me, I watched Lucy race by herself. I guess she dropped something because when she was finished, she got off the motorcycle and started looking around the floor for something. I was about to go back there and help her, but that was the exact moment the pizza came. Nicole shouted for Lucy to join us. When we were all together, I served everyone a piece. As the good uncle that I was, I gave Lucy the biggest piece. She thanked me, but then she passed the slice to Nicole. "Here, Nikki," she said. "You deserve this more than me." For once, Nicole was flattered by her little sister. "Thanks, Luce," she said. I started eating my slice. It wasn't as bad as I'd expected. A little greasy, but I liked the sauce. "Do you like it?" I asked Nicole. She took her first bite and instantly started to choke. I thought she'd burned her tongue or something, but it was much more serious than that. She was choking horribly. She wouldn't stop. She grabbed a napkin and spat into it. The napkin was covered in both cheese and blood. "What happened?" I asked. By then, Nicole had stopped choking. There was glass in my food," she said. She held up a long, thin shard of glass. I couldn't believe it. She almost died. I'm okay, Nicole kept repeating. A waitress noticed the commotion and came over. She was just a teenager, but I was so freaked out that I started yelling at her. The waitress apologized profusely and took our pizza back to the kitchen. She said she'd bring another one, but I refused. We needed to get out of there. By then, the manager came out to talk to us. He tried to offer us a bunch of gift cards. I guess he didn't want us to sue. I yelled at him too. I just couldn't control myself. Nicole was silent the whole time. I think she was in shock. Then I looked over at Lucy to make sure she wasn't scared for her life. That's when I noticed that she was smiling. It was such a dark, angry smile. Just one look at her, and I knew she'd put the glass in her sister's food. "We're getting out of here," I said. "No!" Lucy screamed. She turned toward Nicole. Her face was filled with fake concern. "Nikki, I'm so sorry. That must have been really scary. But before we leave, can you play one arcade game with me, please? I promise it'll make you feel better." "Fine," Nicole said. I wanted to say something, but I still wasn't sure what had happened. I assumed that Lucy was guilty, but I wasn't 100% certain. Before I could do anything, Lucy grabbed Nicole's hand and led her toward the arcade area in the back. She took her right toward that motorcycle game. I followed them. "You can sit here," Lucy said, patting one of the two plastic motorcycles. "I rode this one last time, and it was real fun." Nicole sat down, and Lucy climbed onto the motorcycle next to her. Lucy popped in a couple of quarters, and an image of a racetrack appeared on the screen in front of them. It started a countdown. Right away, I could tell something was wrong with Nicole's bike. It was shaking wildly, while Lucy's bike didn't move much at all. I thought back to half an hour earlier when I saw Lucy crawling around the bottom of the bike, looking for something. That's when I realized that she wasn't looking for something. She was tampering with the bike. "Nicole!" I shouted. "Get off that!" But I was too late. The digital track had a sharp turn, and when Nicole tried to turn her bike, a couple of loose screws popped off and the whole bike crashed onto the ground. Nicole screamed in pain. Her left leg was stuck under the metal and plastic. And to her side, Lucy happily finished the race on her unbroken bike. She crossed the finish line and shouted, "I win!" I crouched down next to Nicole and carefully pulled the bike off of her leg. She was screaming bloody murder, and I couldn't blame her. Her ankle was bent at a terrible angle, and I could see the bone sticking out of her skin. Once again, the manager came over and gave us a string of apologies, but I stopped him. "It's not your fault," I said. And with that, I helped Nicole limp back to the car and drove her straight to the hospital. Lucy sat in the back seat, and she didn't say a word the whole time. When we got to the hospital, I helped Nicole check in, and then I took Lucy straight to their psychologist. Ever since then, Nicole and I refused to babysit. My eyelids fluttered, the road ahead blurring beneath my tired gaze. I wrenched myself awake, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Taking long, deep breaths, I turned the radio up higher, letting the low bass bore into my brain and keep me awake. It had been a long night, driving home from a work conference, and it was already past midnight, the moon a pale sickle through the trees forming a canopy over the road. I knew I should pull over for a rest before my body collapsed in exhaustion, but somehow, stopping on one of these dark, abandoned roads beside the forest didn't seem like a good idea. I hadn't seen another car pass by for at least an hour, and the road stretched on into the darkness, winding through the trees like a serpent. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to concentrate on the road, my high beams cutting through the gloom. But it wasn't long before my eyelids began to flutter again, and I could feel my head dipping forward before I yanked it back up again. If I didn't find somewhere to pull over soon, I risked drifting straight into the trees. It wasn't too long before a light pierced the darkness ahead of me, and I switched off my high beams, feeling marginally more awake than I did before. The light was a pale yellow, filtering through the trees. It wasn't coming from a car. It was only until I turned the bend did I see the sign, half covered in a trail of branches. McDonald's. I'd never been so happy to see a fast food restaurant in my life. A perfect rest stop. I followed the light, which was coming from a lamppost in the middle of the restaurant's car park, and pulled into the abandoned lot. There was nobody else here, but there were lights coming from inside, so I assumed it was still open. Cutting the engine, I climbed out of the car and stretched my sore muscles. I'd been driving for a couple of hours without a break, so it was a welcome relief to breathe in the cool night air and let it wake me up. Now that I was here, I might as well grab something to eat. I hadn't eaten since the conference dinner, which was at least 5 hours ago, so I was getting hungry. Locking the car behind me, I headed through the doors and into McDonald's. The first thing I noticed was the silence. As the doors closed behind me, shutting out the sounds of the night, I was submerged into complete hush. There was no radio crackling over the speakers, no spitting oil from the fryers, no footsteps squeaking over the floor. Just absolute silence. When I looked around, I realized that I was the only one there. The tables were empty, which made sense given the lack of cars in the parking lot. But there was nobody at the order counter either, nor in the kitchens behind. Where was everyone? The door was open and the lights on, so I assumed there must have been someone here. "Hello?" I called out, walking up to the order counter. "Anyone here?" Part of me wondered if I was dreaming, if I had fallen asleep at the wheel and this was some hyper-realistic dream. Because it felt so surreal, being here alone in this empty restaurant, it felt wrong. My calls went unanswered, and I looked around wondering what to do. Maybe I wasn't supposed to be here. But why was the door unlocked if the restaurant wasn't open? I went right up to the counter and pressed my palms against the surface, leaning forward to peer further inside the kitchen. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called again, but the place was empty, silent, abandoned. With a sigh, I turned around to leave when the lights above me flickered, dousing me in temporary darkness that made my pulse race. I stopped, blinking as the lights came back on. What was that all about? Behind me, I heard the soft pad of footsteps and spun around, thinking someone had finally come to take my order. The place was still empty. Had I imagined it? I reached up and rubbed my eyes, fatigue still tugging at the back of my mind. If nobody was here, then I couldn't even get a coffee to wake me up. With a prickle of apprehension, I turned back to face the door and froze. With blonde pigtails tied with red ribbons, stood in front of me, swinging her arms behind her. She smiled at me, but something about the smile felt wrong. It wasn't friendly. Where had she come from? I started. Before I could ask who she was or where her parents were, she ran off, giggling. "Come and find me!" her laughter filling the space around me with an uncanny clarity. What is happening here? What have I walked into? Wait, I called after her, but she had already disappeared somewhere. Was she the only other person here? It didn't make sense. What was a little girl doing out here in the middle of the night? With a sigh, I went after her. I couldn't just leave a little girl out here alone, not until I figured out what was going on. Hey, come back here, I said in frustration, weaving through the tables and chairs toward the back of the restaurant, where the consumer toilets were. I heard a low giggle behind me and turned around, expecting to see the girl, but the room was empty. Where had she gone? The lights flickered again, and in those brief seconds of darkness I felt movement directly behind me, the whisper of a breath on my neck that sent chills down the length of my spine. When the lights came back on again, I was almost too scared to turn around. Holding my breath, I did. The girl was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a little red ribbon lay on the floor by my feet, the same one that she had been wearing. Is she messing with me? Is this some kind of joke? I bent down and retrieved the ribbon from the floor, feeling it slip between my fingers like silk. More footsteps padded behind me, soft and dainty, and my pulse raced in my ears. "Behind you," a female voice whispered, edged with laughter. Before I could turn around, two small hands slipped around my neck and squeezed, and all of a sudden I was gasping for air, fumbling to remove the fingers around my throat. At first I thought it was the little girl, but the figure pressed behind me felt too large, too tall. The grasp around my neck was too tight, too strong to belong to a child. Darkness clouded my vision, and just before I passed out, I managed to catch a glimpse of the figure behind me in the reflection of the window. It was the child, her hair tied up in pigtails, one with a red ribbon, the other without. Only she was taller than before, with long limbs and a strange, disproportionate smile. Then everything went dark, and I felt myself falling. I jolted awake, blinking rapidly. What? I was sitting in my car, parked up by the side of the road. It was still dark, and when I checked the time, it was just after 2 o'clock in the morning. How long was I asleep? I rubbed my eyes, clearing away the grogginess of my vision. What a weird dream. I knew exhaustion could do weird things to your brain, but that dream was a step too far out of my comfort zone, and I shuddered at the mere memory of it. Feeling marginally more refreshed after taking a nap, I started up the engine, checked my rear view, and pulled back out onto the road. I got home an hour later, just after 3 a.m. My wife was already asleep, so I crept into the bathroom to get changed out of my work clothes. As I was removing my coat, something fell out of my pocket, and I bent down to pick it up. My fingers froze, hovering above the ground. A red silk ribbon lay curled on the floor like a snake, and I felt my heart go ice cold. Somewhere behind me, in the room where my wife was sleeping, I heard the soft, low sound of a child laughing.
My range of view was still affected by the rugged sunlight that had beaten my brows after 5 hours at the beach. Dark little patches and starry figures appeared on the corner of my vision, but I was happy I'd gotten a tan on my second day at the summer resort, which I had chosen for vacation. It was a paradise in every way I could imagine, and I had begun to plan another visit to the resort for my next trip. I stood at the reception and waited for my key with which I could return to my room. The water from the beach called my attention. It was washing noises up the bank and down back into the sea. What remained of this was the wind from the ocean billowing into the alfresco reception, which was held in place by the wooden beams. "I'm sorry, it's only going to take a moment," the receptionist said, a rural-looking man with a stubbled beard. He smiled with his eyes, and I returned with a gesture awkwardly, peeling my hair away from my face. He leaned over the counter and started tapping his finger on the desk and using his other hand to glide over the book in search of my name and my belongings, which had been brought from my room to the beachfront. His tappings soon turned rhythmic, and for a moment, I suspected he had become lost in the musicality. "Gemma?" he asked. I nodded. His grin turned fuller. He leaned away from the counter with all his presents. He shot one glance under the counter and provided my possessions wrapped in a cloth. I offered my word of gratitude as I picked up my clothes and received my keys to my room. The thoughts that occupied my mind had been of work and relaxation, nothing but those that I had failed to realize when I was being followed. I had gone into my room in the resort and had prepared for a shower when I heard someone knock on the door. It perplexed me because I didn't expect anyone to find me here. It was the summer holiday and I had 3 weeks of it for myself. Who's there? I asked. Johnny, he said at first. Realizing the consternation in my silence, he cleared his throat. From the reception? You forgot something. I felt the muscles in my head tick as I read myself mentally through the things I knew I had brought with me. I hesitated to open the door as I was still in towel. I'm coming in, he said, and there I was, stupefied to silence in the summer heat when I heard the door to my room click open. The air stopped in my chest, and a lump formed in my throat, swinging back and forth as oxygen pressed itself into my lungs involuntarily. I froze in place as sheer panic overcame me. He pushed the door with his shoulder and barged in. What the fuck are you doing? I cussed, mustering up a fragile front of confidence. The breeze that whirled into the room came heated. It carried the smell of his skin and made my stomach churn. The rooms of the resort were large, but the pressure of our enclosed space kicked in. I could see the walls pull closer, wobbling unsteadily like animated figures. I started to pant in desperation. He noted my eyes and how I looked to the door. He smirked. I swallowed and twitched because the hardened saliva that sank to my stomach hit painfully. I opened my mouth to cuss him out again, then I stopped. His hand went swiftly into his pocket and then out. He swiped his wrist and a pocket knife emerged from nothingness. The rays of sun that came into the house through the window frames caught the going of the steel and reflected it into my eyes. My knees rocked under the weight of my body. My bare toes on the ground clenched and my muscles spasmed. You comply with me and give me that, he warned, gesturing to my abdomen with the knife. I will let you leave peacefully. If you do not comply, he swiped his blade across the empty air, and the message was understood. He did not have to say it out loud. His fierce eyes betrayed its meaning well and purposefully. My life flashed before my eyes. I tightened my fingers up to gain control. Please, I begged him, stepping backwards as he approached with the knife, enclosing me in the corner. My life was all in his hands to decide, and like a manipulative predator, every step his feet took backed me into a corner. To my left of the door was the bathroom. I knew that stepping into the bathroom was damning his warning, but my mind was racing quicker than I could contain. I pleaded again and stepped even further backwards. Shh. His index fingers striped his lips. I'll put my knife in your stomach and pull out your guts like the others before you. Then I'll fuck your corpse. His words drew vividly in my mind, casting a gory scene that I knew was a possibility with the manner in which he held the knife. The stability of his gaze and the determination of each stride informed me that this was not his first. I turned to my left, and in a flash, dashed into the bathroom. I felt his breath coming down my neck, the closing gap between us. Then, a smashing wind followed. The sensation was as though I had been pricked when his knife slashed my hand. The wound was shallow because I had dodged the focus of the blade, but it still bled. I screamed for help as far as my voice could carry me as I pushed my body to hold the door shut when he started to nudge it violently. The assuredness of my own existence hung by a thin thread, and everything flashed by my eyes so fast. I sobbed and stared all around the bathroom for something to defend myself with. I found nothing. My eyes fell onto the bathtub, and I imagined myself chopped up with his knife, made to lay dead in that tub. I shook my head. I could tell when he moved away because the weight on the door was lighter. Suddenly, he was back, barging against the door. I staggered backwards. "Please," I begged. His weight was gone again. I shut my eyes and counted my breath, desperate to surrender. If it meant a return to the more merciful death which he assured me. I pulled my weight off the door and pulled the door open. A strange thing happened because he ran too quickly with no impediment on his path. He jammed his way through and stumbled with a violent bang into the bathtub's face first. His body went limp. Much to my surprise, he was dead. The horror episode of my summer vacation was over as strangely as it had begun.
The warm, summer Montana breeze rushed through the car once we rolled the windows down, and our music escaped the tiny box. Derek, Gina, and I were on our way to a little lake in the middle of the woods, where Derek's grandparents had built a little cabin that we intended to use for the weekend. I'd never been to such a beautiful place, and the vibrant blue sky revealed exactly why they called it Big Sky Country. After driving for hours, we were almost there. As we passed the last gas station, and the last point of civilization for miles, I noticed a grisly man staring at our car as it drove by. Overalls covered with oil and soot, the man was filling up his old green truck, stacked full of tools, wood, and miscellaneous junk. We turned on the dirt road that led us to the cabin. It was a little dusty inside, but it had seen some use earlier that summer by Derek's cousins. It didn't take us long until we ran out to the dock and jumped into the crystal clear lake. We swam for a little bit before eating lunch in the sunshine. It was a great start to the vacation, as I'd never been to such a beautiful place. "I think that I'm going to lay down for a while," I said, as the sun and swimming was draining all the energy from me. "The spare bedroom has plenty of blankets, but shake everything out," Derek said. "It's been some time since anyone's used any of it." I climbed the little hill up to the cabin and found the spare room filled with blankets and pillows that all held that dusty cabin smell among them. After patting off a layer of rested sediment and swatting away a spider or two, I nestled onto the single bed and quickly succumbed to my exhaustion. When I awoke, a sticky sweat clung to every inch of my skin, and my head throbbed for water. Where I thought my energy would be replenished, it was only diminished more so. The golden hue of the early twilight hour streamed through the thin white curtains over the windows. The cabin was quiet, even after I opened the guest bedroom door and entered the living space. None of the lights were on in the cabin, and there were no signs of Derek or Gina, besides the bags they'd dropped by their doors earlier. I assumed they were still out by the lake or swimming, so I made my way down to the dock, only to find it void of my friends. "Hey, guys," I called out, as an uneasy bubble began percolating from gut to throat. Only the cheerful chips of the crickets responded. As I walked up the hill to the cabin, a loud snap came from the woods nearby. I froze in my tracks and waited for the source of the noise. I assumed it was a deer, but the back of my head told me that it had to have been something rather big to make such a noise. I hustled back to the cabin. "Guys?" I asked as I entered and closed the door behind me. When there was no response, I locked the deadbolt. I started to think that my friends were playing a prank on me when I found the note on the kitchen countertop. It was written by Gina and explained that they'd gone to the store to get some liquor. I set the note down and checked out the window in the direction of the snapping sound I'd heard. It was near impossible to see anything between the twisting shadows of the hulking trees. In the thick of the trees, it already appeared to be night, even though the sky still carried a heavenly glow. I took up one of the magazines that I brought along and sat on one of the couches, where I planned to wait until my friends returned. A small squeal escaped my lips, and I dropped the magazine as a horrid, raking noise came from the side of the cabin. Although I was hesitant, I peeked out the window. It was even darker now, to not find anything. As I searched the room for a light switch that would turn on a patio light, another scratch came from a different portion of the house. I found the switch for an outside light in the kitchen, where I conveniently grabbed one of the cooking knives. A slight tapping on one of the glasses turned into a loud crackling as the glass shattered. Suddenly, I thought about the man we'd seen when we drove past the convenience store. Had he followed us? What sort of things would he be capable of doing? I tried to think of what else it could be, but all I could imagine was that man breaking into the cabin and taking me with him. My mind raced and panicked as I rounded the corner with the knife point held high. Nothing but a few wisps of the fading dusk light streamed in the broken window. I checked over my shoulder, getting the sudden feeling that someone was standing with me in the room. I knew that if I stayed inside the box that he would get me. The urge to flee filled my body as my flight mechanisms kicked in. Knife still in hand, I counted to 3 and took a deep breath before breaking from the front door. No one stood on the patio, so I sprinted down the roadway, praying that the intruder wasn't armed with a firearm. My soul utterly sank when a roar filled the air. The fantastical nightmares of a human invader suddenly melted away as I began cursing myself for leaving the house. A glance over my shoulder, and I could see the outline of the beast. A grizzly that stood nearly as tall as the cabin roof. My gut told me to run back to the house, but my head said there was no chance that I would make it. The bear didn't take long to follow me, so I darted into the thick of the trees. An ear-shattering snarl caused my spine to quiver. My whole body tremored, and I stopped running after the first bang. And after the second, I could hear the bear taking off in a different direction. "Lily!" Gina's voice called out. "Lily!" Derek's voice also filled the air. I came out of the trees to see Derek and Gina walking with the man who I assumed was the cause of the intrusion. I ran to them and embraced my friends in a hug. I looked at the man, who still wore his greasy overalls and held a shotgun that was pointed at the ground. He was watching in the direction where the bear ran off. "You all right?" he asked as he finally looked at me. I expected harsh, piercing eyes, but they were kind and gentle. "The bears around here always like easy food that people leave behind." "Thank you," I said. We stayed long enough to board up the window, then began driving home.
My name is Rebecca, and I'm 18 years old. I'm trying to save up money for college, so I've been babysitting for some family friends. I love kids, so it's a pretty fun gig. One day, my next-door neighbor Linda asked me if I was free to watch her son Matthew on the weekend. I didn't know Linda too well, but she always seemed nice. I assumed she was kind of a helicopter parent. I'd often see her playing with Matthew in their front yard, and she seemed to really baby him. Some mothers are kind of like that. I didn't have any plans for the weekend, so I told her I'd be happy to. She told me to come over that Saturday at 6. When I got there, she gave me a printed out list of rules for the house. It included a list of at least a dozen foods that Matthew was supposedly allergic to, plus a bunch of ridiculous directions for how to take care of her son. No TV, no music, no loud voices. It felt like she was a prison warden or something. Once I read the directions, she made me sign the bottom of the paper to make sure that I agreed. I never had another babysitting job like this. I was already starting to regret signing up for it. Linda gave her son an awkwardly long goodbye hug, and then she left. As soon as she drove off, little Matthew breathed a big sigh of relief. I could tell that he was afraid to be himself when his mom was around. Now that it was just the two of us, he started acting like more of a little kid. We played with Legos, and then I took him outside to throw a baseball. He wasn't very good, and he fell a lot, but it was fun. We did that for about an hour, and then I tucked him in and caught up on my homework before his mom came back home. When she got back, she started grilling me on exactly what I did with her son. I told her everything, and then she paid me and let me leave. I thought things went pretty well. But the next morning, Linda called me. She was furious. I had no idea what happened, but she was screaming at me and threatening to destroy me. I told her to slow down and explain the problem, but that just made her angrier. She said something like, "You know what you did," and then she hung up. This happened at 7 in the morning on a Sunday, so I just went back to sleep. I woke up a few minutes later, and right away, I saw that Linda was standing outside my window looking in. As soon as we locked eyes, she ducked down so I couldn't see her. I really didn't understand what her problem was, so I opened the door and said, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" She was still acting like I'd done something horrible last night. She pulled out her phone and showed me at least a dozen photos of the same thing, Matthew's knee. Apparently, he'd scraped it a little while we were outside. Neither of us noticed it at the time, and all the pictures showed was a single red scratch. "That's it?" I asked. "You hurt my baby," she screamed. She shouted a bunch of other stuff too. She was so loud that my parents woke up and ran into the room. I explained to them what Linda's problem was, and they seemed just as annoyed as I was. My dad politely asked her to get out of our yard. She left, but not before screaming, "This isn't over." My parents and I had a good laugh after that, but I was still pretty weirded out by the whole thing. I know that moms can get protective sometimes, but this was ridiculous. For the next week, I saw Linda a couple times on our street, and every time she glared as if she wanted to murder me. I always waved politely, but that didn't help things. The next Saturday, I was hanging out at my house watching TV. My friend Trina was going to come over later, but for now, I was alone. I'd just gotten up to heat some popcorn when I heard someone outside my front door. I thought it was Trina, so I went over and opened it. It was not Trina. Linda was standing on my front porch, smiling darkly. She had a rope in one hand and some sort of paper in the other. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She pushed me to the side and charged into the house. Before I could even react, she grabbed my hair and threw me to the ground. Then in seconds, she tied up my hands. "What are you doing?" I said again. "You hurt my baby," she told me. "I want to teach you how it feels." She sat on my feet so I couldn't move. I tried to wriggle out from under her, but I couldn't. I could see that the paper in her hand was some sort of sandpaper that construction workers would use. Laughing wildly, she pressed the sandpaper against my knee. I couldn't believe it. Her son had gotten a minor scratch on his knee, and in retaliation, this psycho was going to scratch me with sandpaper. "Let's see how long it takes for me to get to the bone," she said. She started rubbing the sandpaper against my skin. At first, it only felt like tiny prickles of pain, but I knew that it wouldn't take long before she drew blood. "Please," I begged, "get off me." She got really close to my face and whispered, "Not until we're even." She started to scratch me again when I heard a knock at the door. Trina was here. I screamed for her to come in, but when the door opened, it wasn't Trina. It was Matthew. He had 2 policemen with him. "Mom?" he said. The policeman pulled Linda off me and led her out of the house. Matthew came over and said, "I'm so sorry. I knew my mom was going to do something crazy, so I called 911. "You did a good thing," I said. After that, Linda was taken to jail for assault. She lost custody of her son, and he ended up moving in with his dad in another state. My leg healed up pretty quickly, and I went back to babysitting. But from then on, I made sure to reject any offers that gave me a bad feeling. I didn't want to live through something like that again.
My name is Alan. Last spring, I divorced my husband of 16 years, Robert. I thought we were happy together, but he'd been cheating on me for years. When I finally caught him in the act, I left and never looked back. I got my own condo near my work and tried to restart my life. Robert and I had never had any kids of our own. That was Robert's idea, of course. And now I am too old to have a family. Honestly, this year has been the worst of my life. Everything I thought I knew about my husband was wrong, and I really didn't want to see any of my friends. They all sided with me in the divorce, of course, but I couldn't stand their sympathetic looks. They all pitied me, and I didn't want to deal with that right now. So I decided to do my best to make a new friend group. Right away, I met my new neighbor, Lainey, and I knew that she'd make a good friend. She was friendly and funny. She came over and introduced herself, and she didn't ask me any embarrassing questions, like why I was all alone at this stage of my life. On that first meeting, we drank coffee and talked for hours. I got a really good feeling about her. It was only after Lainey left that I noticed something odd. I went into my bathroom, which Lainey had used during her visit, and I noticed that my medicine drawer was wide open. She must have rifled around in there. She must have seen all the anti-anxiety medication I was on. This was a clear invasion of privacy, but I forced myself to forget about it. After all, I really needed a friend. 2 days later, Lainey showed up at my door with a casserole. I let her in, and we had a pretty nice chat. At first. Over time, though, she started asking me strange questions. She asked if I'd had any visions since I'd moved in, if any objects had been moved, if I'd heard any voices telling me to do something. I honestly didn't know how to answer. She must have thought I was insane from all the medication I was on. Lainey saw how uncomfortable I felt because she said, "It's nothing personal, Ellen. This condo's just... well, the people who move in here tend to have some strange experiences. I just want you to be prepared." "What are you saying?" I asked. "That my condo's haunted?" "Maybe," she said. She looked deadly serious. "A few years back, a married couple moved in. They seemed happy at first, but the husband had a wandering eye, and when the wife found out, well, she bought a gun and..." Lainey's voice trailed off. "Someone got murdered here?" I asked. She nodded gravely. "And ever since then, residents don't stay here long. But you're the first single person to rent this place, so maybe you're different. Maybe you won't notice anything at all." She left pretty soon after that, acting like nothing had happened. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing Robert walking into the house, and then me shooting him dead. It was horrifying. And I hated Robert more than anyone in the world, but I didn't want to see him get murdered. Eventually, I fell asleep. But around 3 a.m, I jerked awake. Someone was downstairs. I could hear footsteps. Ignoring my fear, I went downstairs and turned on all the lights. No one was there. But I noticed that both my front and back door were wide open, and there were bits of paper scattered all around the floor. When I got closer, I realized that they weren't papers. They were cut-up wedding photos. Someone had snuck in and found my wedding album in one of my still-packed boxes. They'd cut out every photo of Robert, using a Sharpie to scratch out his face and draw X's over his eyes. Who did this? Was it Lainey just trying to mess with me? Was it Robert, who somehow tracked down my new address? Or was it something else? I closed and locked both doors and then picked up all the photos. I dumped them all into a drawer. I figured that if someone was messing with me, I'd need to have the evidence. When everything was cleaned up and I was sure that no one else was in the condo, I headed back upstairs. That's when I heard the voice. It sounded like Robert's, only deeper. It said, "Kill him, Ellen. Kill him." I couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from every direction, from the walls themselves. "Shut up!" I screamed and ran into my bedroom. I got back under the covers and tried to go back to sleep, but I kept hearing that voice. "Kill him, Ellen." The next day, I went next door to visit Lainey. I needed answers. She looked like she was expecting me. She invited me inside, and we sat at her coffee table. "You're scared," she said. "Did something happen?" For some reason, she put her purse in the middle of the table. I didn't know why. Yeah, I answered. It was like you said. Last night, I heard voices. Terrible voices. And what did they tell you to do? She looked down at her purse and then back at me. They told me to kill, I said. And was there anything else? She asked. Did you see anything? Lainey had a very strange expression on her face. She was almost smiling. There were torn-up photos of my ex-husband on the floor, I said. They were defaced. Interesting, Lainey said. She fiddled with a strap on her purse. Now, do you remember tearing up those photos? No, I said. It wasn't me. Are you sure? She asked. Perhaps you weren't aware of what you were doing. Are you saying I'm crazy? All I'm saying is that you found Robert's torn-up photos and a voice was telling you to kill him. Maybe you've just been pushed too far. Maybe you need help. I jumped out of my chair. Everything was finally becoming clear. How did you know his name was Robert? I asked. I never told you his name. Lainey's expression instantly dropped. She grabbed her purse and stood up too. Maybe you should leave. I was not going to leave. Not since I knew what Lainey was up to. I grabbed the purse from her arms and opened it. Her cell phone was hidden inside, recording our entire conversation. It's not what you think, Lainey said. You don't even know what I think, I screamed at her. Let me tell you what I think. I think that you snuck into my house and cut up those photos yourself. I think you made up the whole story about my condo being haunted just to keep me on edge. But the voices you've been hearing, she protested. You switched my medications. On the first day you visited me, I saw that my medicine cabinet was open. You planted that stupid ghost story in my head. You talked about the other residents hearing voices, and you knew that the same thing would happen to me because of whatever crazy pills you put in my medicine cabinet. Is that right? Lainey slowly began to smile. I guess you figured out everything, huh? But why? I asked. I don't even know you. But I know you, she said. Robert's told me everything about you. You're the reason he and I can't be together. I gasped. She was one of the women Robert had been sleeping with. But what did she want from me? You took everything from him in the divorce, she explained. His money's what's paying for your condo, right? That wasn't right at all. I barely got anything in the divorce. Well, all I needed to do was show the world how insane you really are, she said. And once you're locked up, Robert will be free of you forever. And he and I will finally start our new life. He loves me, you know. Now give me back my purse. Okay, I said. I'll give it back. But there are two things you need to know. For one thing, your phone is still recording. So I have your confession. She shrugged. She knew that she could just take her phone back from me and delete the parts that made her look bad. And two, I said, Robert doesn't love you. He slept with dozens of women during our marriage. I made him write down a list of names. And guess what? He didn't include yours. I guess he forgot about you. Lainey instantly went wild. She lunged at me, ready to rip me apart. But I took her purse and struck her so hard on the side of the head that she flew backwards and landed right on top of her glass coffee table. It shattered under her. As she lay there, I called the police. When they arrived, I played them the whole recording. They instantly took Lainey away. Coincidentally, Robert called me the next day to ask if I'd agree to a delay in his divorce payments. I said sure. I had enough money for now. I told him about what Lainey tried to do, and he just laughed. Yeah, he said. Out of all my girlfriends, she was the crazy one.
It was going to be one of the best days of my career. It had been a long couple of weeks of interviews, reference checks, and phone calls, but I'd finally gotten a new job. I put on my new outfit and checked myself in the mirror after a minute of patting my cat who slept on the corner of my desk. I knew that my father would have been proud had he seen me come this far. Outside, the sun neared the horizon line, and I knew that it was time to get moving. It wasn't a long drive from my house, but by the time I pulled out, the sky already sparkled with a few sightings of stars. The gate was open, allowing me to pull in and find a parking spot where the other security guard met me. "Well, that's all of them," he said as he was getting into his truck. "The park is all yours, kid. Call me if you have any questions or concerns." I nodded, then closed the gate after he drove out and onto the main road. As I turned, I took in the sight of the rolling hills, covered in headstones and small mausoleums at the hill peaks, like lighthouses towering over the graveyard. As the night fell, only the lampposts along the walkway illuminated the area, and not very well. Though the graveyard was massive and they'd permitted me the use of the golf cart, I decided to walk for the first night. It was nice to take my time to learn the area. It astounded me how many rows upon rows of gravestones filled the fields of pristinely cut grass. Several of them had flowers set beside them, but most of them were barren with little fissures and crumbles. Being one of the largest graveyards in the States, the place was constantly growing and expanding new plots for the never-ending supply of the dead. As I passed the first mausoleum, I took out my flashlight and checked the area. I was informed that squatters would use the mausoleums as a makeshift home for the evening. I'm not sure how anyone was comfortable with sharing a sleeping quarters with the dead, but it was one of the bigger problems with the graveyard. The other problem was that many of the older mausoleums were made with valuable decorations that were starting to go missing. A few hours had passed with nothing eventful except a few raccoons attempting to break into one of the dumpsters. It was the loud plink noise that caught my attention, but it was an echo from far away and hard to distinguish where it was coming from. As I started to look for the source, all the lampposts in the graveyard flickered, then shut off completely. Though I could see where I was walking from the moonlight, I still removed my flashlight. I'd been told that the power system, being older, would shut off from time to time, and only required resetting the power, which was by the entrance of the graveyard. I decided to investigate the cause of the noise before resetting the power. A strange eeriness filled the graveyard where the light once stood. Another clink gave me a destination. One of the oldest mausoleums towards the back of the lot was the source. I turned off my flashlight and silently approached the mausoleum. I crouched low to remain covered in the shadows, then jumped out to catch the perpetrator. But it was empty. The stone tomb inside was open. When I peeked into the tomb, I found it completely empty, and along the edge was a dirty trail. My heart began throbbing as my imagination jumped to a level I wouldn't normally think about. Was the dead walking around the graveyard? I decided to go fix the light system. If I was going to find the dead walking around the surface, I'd rather do so in the light. When I approached the control panels of the lighting, I flicked the required switches to reset the system. Not even a slight buzz through the wires, and none of the lights returned to life. A movement out in the yard caught my attention, and I abandoned the quest of fixing the lights until I thoroughly checked the area. I took silent steps as I approached the area, and I could hear little shuffles of movement. I leaped from my hiding spot, and my heart sank as my fears stood before me. A skeletal face looked at me from a mossy, leaf-covered body. In my frozen fear, the creature turned and dashed away from me, which allowed me to catch a glimpse of the gold-plated plaque in its grasp. Without another thought, I chased that figure. I slipped on the grass, but I found my footing and made up the distance. The undead intruder didn't seem to run as fast as myself. When I neared, I dove and wrapped my hands around the creature. I assumed I'd be wrapping my hands around a thin skeletal frame, but there was a body filled with muscle and meat. We collapsed to the ground, nearly breaking a headstone that met our force. We tussled around for a moment, until I pried the plaque into my hand, and the unwanted guest pushed away from me. As he returned to his feet, the Halloween skeleton mask fell from his face, and I got a good look at him. I considered holding him down, but there would be no use in it as I had nothing to bind him, so I let him free, where he ran towards the border of the graveyard and vanished into the night. The police took their sweet time arriving at the area where I filed my report, and we searched the light systems to find that the wires had been cut in several places. Upon further searching, we found the location of the stolen plaque as well as a grave that had been dug up. Who knows what sort of things he found buried with the dead, if anything at all. The undertaker wasn't thrilled about the handiwork, but it wasn't too hard to set the place back into order. I got the system fixed and recommended a few things to my boss so that we could keep the masked bandits from getting off with anything valuable from the graveyard. Though I described the robber to the police, I know that he's still out there stalking graveyards under the guise of the dead, prying cheap finds from the dead.